Hello there, and welcome to Trek Prime, episode 41. We're on an uneven number, and we are actually 10 numbers off kind of something we're going to be talking about tonight. Not section 41. We're talking about section 31 here. Now, it would have been interesting if this was our 31st episode. It would have been, ooh, that's weird, but okay, 31, 41, tomato, tomato, whatever.
Yeah.
But before I go into this, because this is a lot to go into, on many levels. I'm going to have, this is Jeff's subject matter. We discussed it a little bit last week in our episode about the women of Star Trek. And he wanted to write out a speech specifically at the beginning of this, which he did about Gene Roddenberry too. But I thought it important just to present Jeff's speech as our key. So I'm going to let you have it, Jeff, and the stage is yours.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so ever since they introduced Section 31 and then the episode Inquisition on Deep Space Nine, it just bothered me from that point because, you know, behind the scenes of Starfleet and the Federation, you have this organization running around doing things like that, you know, where they have no oversight. And, you know, I just feel like they were trying to copy at the time the kind of TV shows that were running during the 90s, like the X-Files and La Femme Nikita, you know, which kind of focused on those covert and secret agencies. And then on Deep Space Nine, I think in later episodes, we found out that, you know, the Cardassians have the Obsidian Order and the Romulans had the Tal Shiar. And the Klingons, they didn't really have anything like that. But what they did have was, you know, their military would sometimes do stuff behind, you know, the scenes, like in Star Trek 6, you know, they seem to be like in, you know, like elements of their military would be doing stuff that, you know, didn't seem like it was authorized by the Klingon high command or something like that. But Section 31 was really the only organization that remained secret to the Federation since, you know, even before the Federation was founded. And, you know, it was autonomous. And, you know, like I said, it had no oversight or accountability. And even though they claim they are not officially part of Starfleet, they are inserted into the Starfleet Charter under Article 14, Section 31. They're pretty well resourced for something not being attached to Starfleet. And they have the license to kill in the name of keeping the Federation safe. To quote Odo in DS9's The Dogs of War, is the Federation claims to abhor Section 31's tactics, but when they need the dirty work done, you know, they look the other way. It's a tidy little arrangement. But this cabal of vigilantes with their, to coin a phrase from Spock, cowboy diplomacy tactics, you know, was something that we would never have seen had Gene Roddenberry been alive. I think it ran so contrary to his vision of an enlightened humanity in the future who've learned from their mistakes and made amends for them. You know, they built an organization that was intended to bring a unified Earth together to see what was out in space in peaceful exploration. Somehow along the way, we're being asked that, you know, by those who didn't create Star Trek, to re-envision Gene's future where this small group of people who used old 20th century covert tactics to go out ahead of our starships and twist and violate the Prime Directive in order to make sure the naive human explorers in their society don't screw things up and start a war. So in other words, humanity may be evolved, but it still needs a parent to make sure that they don't skin their knees while they're running. To me, that's ridiculous, and it completely dismantles Gene's vision of future humanity being able to face conflicts and find nonviolent resolutions in those conflicts. That's what Star Trek was all about years ago. It wasn't about wars and destruction, you know, anything like that. It was about the idea that humanity is being guided by a new philosophy that we don't have today. It's about giving us a glimpse into a human society on Earth where greed isn't a factor, or racism or poverty. Humanity takes full responsibility for the care of our world and supporting those in need. And we can do those things because we learned from our past that all those things we use to find important in life were nothing more than poison philosophies to humanity and nearly brought about its end. Section 31 represents one of those poison disguised as being our protectors. But by their own actions, they put the whole future at risk. They they say the road to hell is paved in good intentions. Well, that's really saying what Section 31 is all about. They say they're doing what they feel is right, but at the same time they're putting everything at risk doing it, hoping they won't get caught. Everything is seen as a threat to them, and as Picard said in Drumhead, the road from legitimate suspicion to rampant paranoia is very much shorter than we think. But someone will always be out there with us, waiting for the right climate in which to flourish, spreading fear in the name of righteousness. That sums up the problem with Section 31 and why it has no place in Trek lore. But, we as fans should have remained vigilant through those years that CBS and Paramount wouldn't try to slip their old view of things about getting better ratings into Star Trek canon. By his own words, Gene Roddenberry had many arguments with producers and writers, even as far back as TOS, to spice up the show for more action-oriented stories. But he wouldn't change his view. And honestly, it was his baby to begin with, not anyone else's to alter. People who worked with him should have respected that. Unfortunately, here we are. And as crazy as this is going to sound, viewers of Star Trek Discovery are mad as hell about how Section 31 is being portrayed on that show now. Some of the viewers don't like the dark themes of cannibalism and dystopianism in Discovery, but the implementation of Section 31 is apparently okay with them as far as they're concerned, which is a bizarre thing to say the least. So, Andre?
That was amazing. I cannot believe that you basically sat there and said the whole podcast in about 10 minutes. You aced everything. I don't believe it. I mean, I knew you were making a speech, but my goodness. I mean, I might as well just make podcast over because you get every point to the letter. What do you spend a week making that or something?
No, I just kind of typed it out.
Whoa, that's beyond Picard worthy.
Yeah.
Whoa, I did not expect that.
I mean, I just wanted to have it in front of me so I didn't screw it up to make my point clear.
That was like, okay, so I was gonna have a point, but you made it about 20 times over in that. That was, wow. Okay, good for you. Okay, so let's talk around that because I can't really fit anything per se, but we can expand on that, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, because we can illustrate points, where the Section 31 thing
exactly
just
right about it.
Yeah, I mean, we can illustrate, how, like you said before, how Section 31 is really a lazy tactic by writers to insert into things.
Thank you.
Well,
do you mind if I just kind of mention some character sketches here? I'm going to go to Deep Space Nine because that was the origin point of Section 31. I know it was a prominent part of Enterprise. We'll start with Deep Space Nine since they created it during that time. Now, you implied it your own kind of way, but I kind of said in my head to be curmudgeonly when I first saw Section 31, they're trying to make that X-Files money. You said it another way. That's basically how I looked at it.
Yeah.
They figure they get a multi-million-dollar TV show over on Fox, so they figure, okay. And there were shows copying that too.
Oh yeah.
And like you mentioned, La Femme Nikita, those were hot at the time. Those kind of FBI investigation, almost James Bondy kind of thing, supernaturally themed, of course. Except Section 31 was like very James Bond.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, you kind of implied in Inquisition, they were trying to recruit Bashir by trying to see how, devoted he was to the Federation, whatever. But you mentioned Odo, and I wanted to bring this thing with Odo up because that was really uncomfortable. Now, I don't know if they ever mentioned that Starfleet knew about it, but basically the founders got infected with a virus.
Yeah.
And when Odo was found to have it too, Bashir was able, I believe it was Bashir, if I remember correctly, was able to determine that it was Section 31. Was it Starfleet or Section 31 that actually gave him that virus to infect the founders with?
Well, he found out. Remember, he was trying to question somebody he was trying to communicate with somebody, and they kept giving him the runarounds, right. And he kind of pieced together what was going on.
I believe Section 31 were involved in that too, weren't they?
Yeah, they were.
So, okay, Starfleet, with its ethical situation, we've heard them, guarantees they're called. They call them guarantees in the Starfleet universe.
Yeah.
There's articles, yes, but what guarantee would allow an organization within Starfleet who are supposed to protect life forms and not interfere to infect an enemy, one member of an enemy species, who was on the side of the Federation to go kill off their entire brethren?
Yeah, genocide.
I mean, I mean, that's like, oh gosh, I mean, that's like the very worst of what we in our society do.
Yeah.
The very worst of it. And I'm thinking, why would they bring that into Star Trek? I mean, Section 31 is bad enough as it is, but why have the Federation cooperating with them to commit a breakdown of all morality?
Yeah.
All of it. You know, I mean, they've faced enemies before. They didn't go in there and infect the Klingons with a virus that would kill them.
Yeah.
You know, that's not how the Federation rolled. I don't know why they did that with the Dominion and the Founders.
Yeah, they had the 4-year war with the Klingons that, you know, they didn't have to go and do that, you know.
Right.
Or,
unless, you know, the whole idea was that, well, since these beings can change shape, there is no way we can trust anybody when they're around.
Yeah.
And, you know, if they're sending out shock troopers and they're sending in infiltrators, we don't know who anybody is. Unless the idea of shapeshifters being enemies of the Federation was that difficult. Now, if the animated series is to be believed, we already had shapeshifters that could be deceptive, the Vendorians.
Yeah.
But they quarantined their planet. If they felt that way about the Founders, why wouldn't they just put some quarantine around the Founders' homeworld?
Yeah.
Why would they necessarily need to go out and poison them?
Yeah.
I mean, or even better, just don't go into the adult Gamma Quadrant. Just say, okay, you want the Gamma Quadrant for yourselves, keep it.
Well, remember they had that idea of mining the entrance, which kind of kept them at bay until the Cardassians took over the station and dismantled that minefield, you know.
So, I mean, I don't know. That whole poisoning thing just seemed really sadistic to me. And the fact they use Odo to do it, it's like, obviously Odo is proven that he is, you know, even though he's not a Federation person, that he's done good things for the Federation. Why would you want him to poison him?
Yeah.
You know, why couldn't you poison some Vorta in a way that wouldn't affect them, but it would get to the Founders through them? Why do you have to poison Odo?
Yeah. It
almost seemed like, you know, they didn't care what happened to him. It was just, I don't know. I just, the way they carried that out, that was something that I thought of.
And, you know, the funny part of it is at the end of that, of Deep Space Nine, it really wasn't the virus that stopped the war in the first place. It was Odo himself who managed to get to the head founder there that was, you know, orchestrating the war. And because she was sick, he managed to help her, you know, and heal her. And it did just the opposite of what the Section 31 wanted to happen. He did the opposite, and all of a sudden the war, he was able to stop the war. So, you know, in a way, they didn't really get what they wanted.
And in short, it kind of shows that between Section 31 and Federation Standard Policy works better.
Yeah.
You know, and Odo basically followed something along that lines of saying that I'm going to go in there and I'm going to use my wits rather than my might to try to end this war.
Yeah.
Like, if I cure her, maybe she'll realize that, yeah, well, you know what cured me? Solids cured me. So maybe you want to think differently about the solids.
Yeah.
You know,
shared experiences with
or the Federation tactic. Section 31 would have said, well, kill them all and let the Federation sort them out, you know?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
And, okay. I was going to talk a little bit about the character of Sloan, Luther Sloan, but here's my thing about him. For a long time, until we saw Enterprise, I kind of saw Section 31 as being kind of in his head.
Yeah.
When he was dying and Bashir and O'Brien entered into his head through this device they had, it all seemed like Section 31 was all kind of in his head. It was like a library you could see.
Yeah.
You know, so I always thought Section 31 was just him. He was just it, you know, basically at the end of the day. And then in Enterprise, they had Malcolm Reed working for it.
Yeah.
But, why are they bringing this up again? You know, this is Deep Space Nine's thing. And I thought it was like one guy.
Yeah.
Who was kind of maybe a little bit paranoid and delusional. I could sort of see that, like one guy being that way.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention that was also roughly around the time in Enterprise they put out those books.
Yeah, oh yeah, those
Section 31 books, which apparently have very little to do with Section 31. They're just they start out as a profile and they go into a mission in the story, and then at the end it's like, well, Section 31 record's over and that's it.
Yeah.
They're not really related to Section 31. They're just, you know.
Yeah.
Even the Bashir one has nothing to do with it. That's just another mission they're going on, and they just use that as it's a way to. It's like, this is going to sell books. This X-File-y kind of thing, you know, this shady thing. But you covered that Gene Roddenberry wouldn't have wanted that element in the show because we're supposed to be in a new evolved future, not using tactics we would use in our time.
Yeah.
And okay, you made your speech. I'm not going to make a speech here, but I was thinking about the whole Section 31 thing last night, and this is a level of Section 31 that's a little bit weirder to comprehend because it spills over into our real life.
Okay.
But I have to mention this. And the framework I'm going to put into this, I decided to give it a name. And when you ever had an idea when you're going to sleep, and when you wake up in the morning, half of it's flown away, it's gone.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah, I guess that happened to me last night. I thought I had the meaning of this whole thing. Woke up this like, what is it? And now I'm kind of this brain fart again. So anyway, but there it is. That's the idea. It may sound like a strange name, but I had this idea last night, thinking of Section 31, of what I called the miserable machine. I'll explain what that is. Remember that part in Star Trek: The Next Generation where I think this one where they found data lore?
Yeah.
And Picard is saying, well, we need to remind ourselves that we are also another kind of machine, in this case, electrochemical in nature.
Yeah.
Now, this is taking humans and kind of putting them into the context of being like a machine. That's why I'm using the term miserable machine.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's the subtext for this. I was watching some of the recent YouTube, commentaries, podcasts you've been sending me, and I just wanted everybody out there to know that even though I haven't commented on a lot of your information, I have been watching as many Star Trek podcasts as I possibly can. Many of them about Star Trek Discovery, some of them with legitimate news, some of them with straight-up conspiracy theories. And yes, I'm not going to mention names, but I know exactly who you are. You're all out there. And I thought, since we're doing Section 31, I'm just saying my little eyes open. I know what's going on out there. So even though I'm not commenting, I know. I know every theory like a book by now. I mean, I can sit here and read off a scroll. I, Andre, declare that you have said this and this. I know it. I know it's been said. I know it's out there. I know what a lot of people think. I can do personal commentary on it. So don't think I'm not watching. I'm just not commenting because I don't want to get mixed up in somebody's comment thread. That's just me. But I'm watching, so don't think I'm not watching, for better or for worse. So under that context, I've noticed that a lot of people in these videos are commenting on what's happening over at CBS and a lot of the secrecy behind Star Trek. And this is causing a lot of people to stretch truths and make up things that fill holes that aren't getting filled through official sources. So some very opportunistic people will be angry at Star Trek's current existential crisis and will tend to react at grasping rather than extended thinking. And maybe in some way, this whole business with Star Trek Discovery and the Kelvin timeline and the confusion from the Viacom split and what's really happening and what isn't is to Star Trek fandom what Section 31 was of Star Trek itself. How it's created division, anxiety, uncertainty, and even hostility over the cagey secretiveness of CBS. How Star Trek fans are now people who have a fantasy of being secret agents of their own, whistleblowing some major secret like a sci-fi Edward Snowden. Honestly, they're not.
Yeah.
They're not. And that attitude is only going to make Star Trek appear more unstable and possessive to people who aren't fans of the show, and will make people who are fans of the show therefore appear to be obsessive and unstable themselves. And that's where I bring in the idea of the miserable machine. A functional machine does its job and it does it well and it does it cleanly. A miserable machine keeps making the same error over and over and over and over again and doesn't have the realization to know it has to stop. It just keeps pumping out the same mistake. That's why I call this situation the domain of the miserable machine. It's just an abstraction. But basically what I'm saying is that And like you said, Star Trek fans' obsession over Section 31 now, I think, has created a miserable machine situation where everybody is trying to sleuth out what's going on in there, and now there's infighting.
Yeah.
On a level that I've never seen in Star Trek fandom before. And when I was last night when I was watching, some of these comments and some of these videos. Now, it's mostly in the comment sections of these videos.
Yeah.
The videos themselves are usually just, people stating things, but the comments get ugly and ugly and ugly. And I mean, I wouldn't even go into specifics. I'm just saying I'm sure you've seen them all. They're very ugly.
Yep.
And, I sometimes complain we're not getting enough comments here, but if we're going to get that kind of thing, I'm glad we don't. I mean, I'd rather have nothing than negative, honestly. I know that's a strange point of view, but, I'd rather have few that have substance than a lot that don't.
Yeah.
So here's my idea. I see this whole situation of people feeding off this negativity. Like you said, people are upset that Section 31 isn't the same way now. It's that miserable machine that keeps doing the same error over and over, and it can't resolve itself.
Yeah.
It's a loop. It's like a loop of miserable behavior. And you implied it, but I wanted to ask you a direct question here, going in with this miserable machine idea. Yeah. Do you think the origin of this schism in the Star Trek fan community and this obsession with intrigue and with secrets in the show and out of it, because it's in Discovery and all this stuff too, but it's also with the fandom, as I expressed. Do you think there's a possibility of tracing it not just at the beginning of Discovery and CBS All Access, not just at the beginning of that, but cycling it all the way back to the beginnings of the Enterprise E era and kind of militarizing Star Trek through Deep Space Nine to a certain degree, and then the formation of Section 31 and making Star Trek's internal universe a less trustworthy and more paranoid one?
Yeah, I don't know if they intended it to be like a paranoid one, but they're certainly leading it that way, especially when you look at how fans now are kind of seem like a lot of them are just jumping onto the bandwagon, think that it's okay.
Right. Again, like this miserable machine that keeps moving and moving the same way.
That's right. So yeah, I mean, I do see that the origins of this goes way back to the late 90s, I think, and how they kept inserting darker elements into Star Trek little by little, not right off, but little by little, to see how much the fans would stand. When First Contact came out, it got rave reviews from fans saying it was a great movie, and I think people that were in the know, of creating the movies and stuff got the wrong impression that maybe this is the way to go.
Right, because basically that movie was taking the character of Zefram Cochrane, who was the creator of what made Star Trek space travel possible, into an unheroic character.
Yeah.
In other words, saying to Star Trek fans, you can have your heroes.
Yeah.
It's more important it's more important that your heroes have flaws than they're heroic. Now, you can translate that to today. In Marvel, now obviously all the Marvel characters have flaws, but the flaws don't take away from their heroic actions.
That's right.
And that's again, you kind of went into this a little bit a few minutes ago too. You know what it takes to get that kind of thing working? It takes good writing.
Yeah.
To make a character that has flaws and that can make mistakes but can do heroic things and have a benevolence, that takes good writing.
Yeah.
Because, bad writing would be, well, let's make the character unheroic and just unlikable.
Yeah.
And like I said, do you think that they could have made, for example, Zefram Cochrane in First Contact more, human and more realistic, but still kept him as a likable character?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't have to go to the extreme of trying to make this guy look like, the motorcyclist next door. I mean,
right.
They could have gave him a much more respectable character arc, in his part where, he's kind of despondent, because everything is, the Earth is going through hard times, but then he gets this infusion of hope from people from the future, and then he kind of feels like, well, maybe I can contribute something.
Right, and I mean, that would kind of go in with the Zefram Cochrane they had in TOS.
Yeah.
Who was kind of an isolated, lonely person. But when Kirk gave him that speech about we're a million planets spreading out or whatever, he was all excited about the prospect until, he found out he wasn't. But the point is that, they could have given him that sense of, oh, yeah, life stinks, you've been through a war, and I'm going to give up on this Phoenix. And they come back and he realizes, oh, yeah, I got to go up there.
Yeah.
like I said, but again, and one thing I've discussed with a lot of people that I know who are into Star Trek is, and they'll say that, as with anything, what's happening in Star Trek now did not start a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Most things in life start a long time ago, and they accumulate over time if they're not stopped. Now, I'm not saying they couldn't have stopped a lot of this stuff. And the reason I use Section 31 as an important key is that should have really stayed in Deep Space Nine and never showed up anywhere else.
Yeah.
That should have been localized right to that series. But they brought it back in Enterprise, and I never really understood why they needed to.
Yeah.
I mean, did you see any great need for that to be brought up in that series?
Yeah, and I think what they thought is that the fans liked Section 31 idea, and I guess that last season they were desperate to try to keep the show on the air, and they were just inserting whatever they thought the fans wanted to see in there, and the Section 31 just happened to be one of those things, But again, it runs contrary to the vision that Gene Roddenberry had of the future,
Right. So, okay, you mentioned this a little bit, and you aced it when you did, but I wanted to ask you a question. Obviously Starfleet came out, and the Federation in general came out of the of Earth becoming United Earth, and sometime in the 21st, 22nd century, and overcoming our personal problems, and going out and starting to explore the galaxy as a unified race. That was what Gene Roddenberry's vision was, right?
Yeah.
A United Earth went out there and started exploring other planets with the lessons we learned.
That's right.
Okay. So in that world where there was still, and I'm going to bring in this up because this is something that I think affects a lot of this, or should I bring it up now? But I want to ask a question before I do that. In such a world, just that basic world Gene Roddenberry created, would there ever, within Starfleet, per se, even be a need for something like Section 31 to even happen in the first place?
Well, we were watching Star Trek for years until, Deep Space Nine, and it didn't seem like there was ever really a need. I mean, we had those corrupt admirals in TNG.
Right, so are they all Section 31 now? Is that the excuse for corruption?
So, I mean, what are they trying to say? That they were all unified under Section 31 or something? I mean, that's a bit too easy to explain instead of just misguided.
It's the lack of writing skill. It's like, let's make some easy device.
Instead of saying these people were individually misguided and wrong in their thinking, it's like, oh, well, no, they were all part of a cabal of people that were trying to usurp, the galaxy to save Federation interests. It's like, well, that's just the simple answer. You take it from today's times and are trying to apply it into the 24th century, as way, we would be doing things then. And that doesn't sell. I mean, it's like what you told me once about how people in ancient Rome did things.
I was going to bring that up. Rome probably had its own type of, I mean, I don't know everything about it. They probably had their own types of hierarchies and spy rings that we would not have anything like today.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, certain political things involve gladiatorial fights. We don't do that now. Well, we do. We call them election debates. But anyway, the point is,
yeah.
I mean, we don't bring out our swords. We just use our voices as swords. But anyway, we don't exactly use a physically violent system.
Yeah.
We use verbal weapons. So if we're using verbal weapons now, what makes you think that might evolve even further in the future?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Now, I can sort of see Romulans, like they said, the Tal Shiar, or, Cardassian, the Obsidian Order, because they're different cultures. I can sort of see that. But, and now I can even see Odo, kind of wondering why the Federation wouldn't have an organization like that, because he was, raised on Bajor and has a different ethic.
Well, he was constantly working with Cardassians, so it kind of got used to it,
Right, so he kind of knew what that was. So I'm not really, and besides, Odo was very cynical, so it makes perfect sense that he would not see what was wrong with Section 31. But here's my issue. This is a side issue with it.
Yeah.
Why didn't Sisko have more moral outrage about it? I mean, obviously he had some problems with it, but he didn't seem to have the kind of moral outrage I would have thought a Federation captain would have had.
Well, remember that episode, what was it, In the Pale Moonlight or something like that? Where,
yes.
I mean, of course, if he was able to do that, then apparently he wouldn't have that much moral objection to a Section 31 if he was able to.
Are you trying to imply Sisko's ethics were a little bit shaken?
Maybe just a little less pure than, say, some of the captains that we knew before him. Maybe he felt a little more like it's more justified to have, something like that around. I mean, not every person's going to think the same way about that. I mean, we see that here on the internet with the people fighting back and forth over why we should have a Section 31 instead of not. But, I think there's two schools of thought with that, because, on one hand, having a super secret organization to make sure things aren't turning against you also can be a double-edged sword, because in the attempt to try to prevent something, you might actually trigger something. And there's no guarantee that what they do is going to stop anything. Like, well, just take 9/11, for example. We had all these organizations in the United States, FBI, CIA, the Secret Service, all these things where, we're telling everybody, look, we're going to get, there's some plan to be made to attack New York. Nobody cared. Nobody listened to it in Washington. What good did this,
And then when it actually did happen, of course, the internet to this day is still lighting up with all kinds of made-up stuff about why it happened.
Yeah.
All kinds of it, when in reality, it was just lackadaisicalness.
Yeah.
That's all it was.
No guarantee that a Section 31 is going to be a benefit to anybody. I mean, let's take a look at the history of the Federation. I mean, we've seen how many wars. We had the 4-year war. We had the Zindi conflict in Enterprise. We had the Romulan conflict. We had the Cardassian war. We had skirmishes with the Romulans. We had the Borg. None of those things were prevented by Section 31.
It's a sad thing to say, but this is something I'm wondering. Because we've talked about this on our after shows among the writers. The writers that came up to Gene Roddenberry, the Rick Bermans, the Ira Stephen Bears, all those people. Do you think that Section 31, in a way, was a full frontal assault on Gene Roddenberry's vision? And because you just kind of implied that, saying not so much that they're trying to knock it down, but they're trying to say, for years we've been trying to figure out how the Federation has solved all these conflicts without armed conflict.
Yeah.
But, we can't really understand it the way Gene Roddenberry did. So we'll just put it in contemporary terms and say, this evil organization that goes around doing whatever means are necessary kind of stuff are behind every little thing. They won the Romulan War. They won the Klingon 4-year war. They defeated the Borg. Blah, 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 blah. They can just use that as... It's not a matter of lazy writing. It's like, well, you know what? Gene Roddenberry's vision is too wacky-doodle for us, so we'll just go out there and make this easy device instead of challenging ourselves to what Gene Roddenberry put us to the challenge for in 1966 when he first submitted this to NBC to begin with.
Some people are making the assumption that Roddenberry was anti-military, which is completely false, because you look at, when you watch Star Trek, there's a command structure on this ship. Captain, commander. I mean, it's a military-based command structure, and even Kirk himself in one episode said that we're a unified military. We're not just Air Force, Army, Marines.
Right, because that guy asked him, did the Navy something?
Yeah.
He said, we're a combined agency, implying that the Navy and all those agencies are combined into this Earth space probe thingy.
Yeah. With
the Starfleet. But the point of the matter is that is not one part of the armed services also negotiation?
Yes.
So you could say that perhaps over the years, Starfleet's military organization simply evolved into a state where it didn't attack every person physically if there was a problem, that it started thinking more in terms of negotiation and non-interference and using weapons only as last resorts.
Yeah.
So even if Gene Roddenberry wasn't anti-military, did he not mean that the military could become part of a service that focused more on negotiation, science, and exploration, and less on tactical war situations?
Yeah.
I mean, is that out of the...
As far as Section 31 goes, Picard would be a threat to them, because Picard's skill with discussing and being more of an ambassador to things would interfere with whatever plans Section 31 may be creating at the time.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So he would be a threat to to Section 31, which is ridiculous, because Star Trek's supposed to say, well, we don't have to fight. If we don't want to fight, we can sit down and negotiate a compromise. I mean, that's how we got all these borders. The neutral zone. The zone that they had where you had the Maquis and all them. I mean, you had all the zone. Yeah, the demilitarized zone. You had all these things that were created by people discussing stuff to bring a stop to wars. to try to work things out better.
Right, with all that stuff, why would you need a Section 31 if you had these
Because all
board?
you do is what? You send an agent in there to blow up a star, so you take a wipe out a whole star
Right,
system.
so why have a neutral zone? Why have a demilitarized zone?
Yeah, really.
But like I said, these are all military constructs. So if Gene Roddenberry thought of Star Trek as a super ethical, non-militarized space military, I guess, or a combined agency, why on earth would you need a covert operation?
Yeah,
If everything was kind of all together.
that's right.
So and I mean, this goes back with the fan thing too, but I just...
Look, there was this one episode in TOS where Kirk and Spock were on a secret assignment from Starfleet security to go and steal a cloaking device. Remember that?
Right, with the Vulcan death grip thing, yeah.
Nothing mentioned about a Section 31 in that. That was thrown right out there to the audience that this was not a secret thing. They explained that they got orders for them to do this because they didn't want to have the rest of the crew implicated that they knew anything about it, so that way they wouldn't get punished.
Right, and it was Starfleet who sent them on that mission, not
right.
Section 31.
That's right.
They have not edited it in any way, so they did not need Section 31 to do that.
But now there's already people now who like Section 31 are saying that, oh, that was a Section 31 mission. But I'm saying, where does it say that? Where does it say that? Yeah, it doesn't.
It was clearly a Starfleet order that was given specifically to Kirk and Spock.
Yeah.
And, so obviously Starfleet had it within itself, without all that Section 31 stuff, to be able to order people on secret missions for certain things.
That's right.
If needed. But how often did you see it happen? And when it did Starfleet say, well, we're gonna pass it back on some other organization to do it for us? They don't need that.
Yeah.
It's obviously in there where they can give certain secret missions to people. So that cancels the need for Section 31 right out.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
They shoehorned this thing in Deep Space Nine when it, like you said, it wasn't needed. And it was just a plot device to garner more ratings, to get people more interested in the show, because, now we're just like X-Files and we're just like, La Femme Nikita now, and, now you can watch us and, But it was, like you said, it was a contrived plot line, and it doesn't really fit with Star Trek, and it never needed to be there in the first place.
Well, and I hate to say this, but, seeing Section 31 pop up over and over and over again and be such an easy writer's device, it made me wonder. Now, Gene Roddenberry had his imperfections. I know about many of them, but do you think that there are just some people who love Star Trek, who write for it, but they themselves as people are defined by the very sorts of prejudices and paranoia, and I do mean defined, that Star Trek actually stands against? And when they watch the show, they're thinking, well, it's an interesting idea, but I just don't feel humanity will ever evolve into an organization that is able to do all these things without something, because they can't conceive of it. And so they have to put some wrecking ball into it to make themselves satisfied. And I'm wondering if that was one of the things that the writers did. That
a lot of the stories, the pocket story, those paperback stories that I read, in the 80s and 90s, like that you were writing, a lot of those stories didn't really seem to have much emphasis on how would you call it, like, a lesson to be learned, or or something in there, something philosophical to grab out of the book. There was some that were, but the ones that were written by new writers and stuff always seemed to deal with, a secret thing is happening, and these worlds are in danger, or, it was always some kind of a conflict that required the Enterprise going in to fight.
I see. So you're saying that it basically had a Star Trek kind of dressing, but somebody was trying to tell their own kind of story underneath it.
Yeah, they weren't really trying to make a real bona fide attempt to try to approach things in a Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry manner to deal with these problems. They were just going into this thing trying to make action, where, the captain's in trouble. And
it's funny you mentioned that, because I wanted to mention a good example here of a Star Trek book that actually did contain a Star Trek-like story. And actually, should I mention that one? Because it could get into a weird area here. I'll mention the first one because it's a little easier to take. It was one of the Peter Pan Star Trek stories, and I believe it was called Mirror for Futility.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And basically, it's similar to the Voyager episode about these two robots who were fighting a war, but the war was actually over.
Yeah.
Except these were two robot ships, and they were programmed by their makers. And it was a story intended for children, where, by the way, they screwed up the characterizations of all the Star Trek crew in this book. Screwed them absolutely up. For some reason, Uhura turned into Tippi Hedren. For some reason. And they screwed everything up in that. But the story actually had a pretty potent and, shall I say for kids, kind of adult anti-war message about the futility of fighting something you don't know. Kind of like the Beal and Lokai thing.
Yeah.
And that's a Star Trek story. Star Trek is there at who was it who said it? Star Trek stories, when they beam down to a planet, they contain lessons.
That's right.
That's what Star Trek is. You know, it's not what Shatner said, where it's like, oh, we're just trying to draw you in as the audience. It's part of what the show is.
Yeah.
You know, it's integrated into the show. And if you take something like Section 31 and put it in there, it basically says that Star Trek's universe really has no moral derivative. It just has a pretension of a moral derivative.
Yeah.
Which basically means that Star Trek is dishonest, that Star Trek is false advertising.
Yeah.
So would that not create a fandom of people who like the series, ironically, who didn't really think that the future could be good because Section 31 canceled that possibility out long ago?
Yeah.
So in other words...
Remember you said, there was a division in the fandom, and I think what it is you got... Yeah, you got a split because you got the side that doesn't agree with Roddenberry's vision, and you got the side that does. And what I was trying to make a point was that whether you agree with him or not, it was his show. And if you don't like it, watch something else, because, why should you go in there and meddle with it and try to twist it into your version of what Star Trek is? That's not your show. You didn't create it.
Well, that's a lot of good ideas in life. You have a wonderful idea. Somebody gets jealous and upset about it, and they want to go in and take that idea. Instead of making up an idea of their own, they want to go in there and take that idea and build it to their liking.
That's right.
Which creates conflicts and tensions and sometimes outright war.
Yeah. So,
like I said, I feel right now, and I'm saying this with no sense of melodrama, and it does break my heart to see Star Trek fandom once, with as complicated and screwed up and paranoid as our actual reality is. Star Trek fandom always used to be a big, just human sigh of relief to me, that these were people who love this show about humanity and the future and people getting better and characters to relate to. Now itself is in a massive crisis.
Yeah. Where
there's actually name-calling and threats. I mean, there's literal threats in these comments. Yeah. And I mean, it brought me to something my friend Henry mentioned to me about something else, but I'll mention it in Star Trek. And it makes me wonder, too. This is about you and I here. I mean, other people may have their own ways of looking at it. What happened to Star Trek when we weren't paying attention?
Yeah.
What happened when we looked away maybe for a minute? When did this all get to this level? I mean, now in the 90s, it was there, but when did it all get to this point? Where on the internet, where in that world did it get to this level? What personal point tipped this all off?
Yeah.
I mean, it had been building for years, but do you think it happened maybe during the Kelvin era, or do you think that it tripped off during Discovery? Was there something in there that just made this all kind of come to a head like this?
You mean as far as the fans
going to the story? Right. Or do you think it just kind of gradually built up and we didn't notice it? Or do you think we weren't paying attention at one point and it just kind of exploded at that point?
Well, okay, I'll tell you. I think it was a gradual thing, but it wasn't such a pronounced thing until Abrams' Star Trek began. And then I noticed that the conversations about Star Trek really started to go negative, where people were really getting pissed off about Abrams' vision of how Star Trek should look, and it got so bad that they actually had to come out and say, oh, well, this is an alternate reality. This isn't, part of it, which kind of quieted a little bit, the criticism about it. But as they did the movies and stuff, and then especially that second one where they had Khan in it, I think that really got the fans mad then. And I think that's when things started to fracture within the fandom, was when, they wanted to have Star Trek back as the canon Star Trek back, and they weren't getting it. Fans weren't getting it, and they were just getting all these imitations, and that's not what they wanted. And Discovery, they're seeing that as just another imitation, where there's some people that actually like Discovery, and they're saying, well, no, you people are just old-fashioned conservative, and you don't want to change. And we like the show. It's like, well, fine. I'm not saying that you don't like science fiction, but I'm just saying if you like that kind of Star Trek, go watch another science fiction show that appeals to you. Just don't mess with ours. With our Star Trek. That's the way we wanted it. I mean, there's no law that says they can't go out and make their own kind of. I mean, look, they did the Orville. I mean, they could have made another sci-fi show that was.
Oh, and I wanted to bring that up a little bit. I mean, I don't want to do a separate thing on that, but I wanted to bring that into it a little bit. Just this has nothing to do with Section 31, but this whole Orville is the new Star Trek trope. Now, I haven't watched a lot of it, but to me, I mean, it may have a Star Trek-y flavor, I'm sure, but it's not Star Trek. It just really isn't Star Trek. I mean, it doesn't have the Star Trek name. It has Star Trek influences, but it's not Star Trek. But if people are getting the Star Trek flavor from it, that's fine. But I don't know. Just that whole odyssey of history and that world Star Trek created, I would like to see that flavor go back into that history.
Yeah, unfortunately, it can't exist in Star Trek right now the way it is. But people that like that kind of science fiction, the Star Trek style science fiction, they're going to see, and maybe, kind of gravitate towards the Orville, because you kind of see that there's messages in each of those episodes that were like messages you would find in TNG, and other Star Trek programs. But like I said, right now, it's split. Like the soul of Star Trek exists in another show, and Star Trek now exists as some kind of a parody of itself, in the hands of people that never created the show in the first place. They're just in it for the money, for the ratings, and that's all they care.
And with all the things they're changing, and all the things they're making all the way different, what are they bringing in and not really changing all that much? Well, some people they are. Section 31, they want to bring that into it.
Yeah.
I'm like, of all things to bring into it, that you could bring into it, I mean, you throw Harry Mudd into it a little bit, but whatever. Why do you throw, I mean, they didn't make it Star Trek Discovery with Harry Mudd now. They just they kind of sprinkle him into a story. But why did they bring Section 31? We're going to make a series on Section 31 now.
Yeah.
Why would they want to bring that? Of all things they could bring over, it's like, don't bring that.
Well,
that belongs in a weird period.
Reading all the comments that I've been reading about, the idea of what they're doing with Section 31 on Discovery now, I don't even think a series of it is going to work, because there's already people against it. So
because they like their Section 31.
The way it was in, Deep Space Nine and Enterprise, that's the way they want it, but it's not being given to them that way, So it's like, well, look, you can't have it both ways. You either want it this way or you don't. It's like, either you like your dystopianism or you don't.
So
yeah.
Okay. To end this off, unless you get another point, I wanted to ask you a question. So this is a bit of a stretchy and maybe uncomfortable one, but the Section 31 thing and this whole thing that's happening now, this kind of paranoid thing within Star Trek, do you think there's a way of kind of resolving it all so it's not a problem?
That's really going to depend on the people working on it right now.
Or is that just too hard a question to answer at this point?
It can be fixed. I mean, if they ask me, Jeff, will you go in there and fix that? Yeah, I can fix that just like that.
So could I. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to do it, really.
There'd be a lot of pink slips being handed out. That's for one thing. But I could fix that, and there, because I have the will and I have the foresight and the, to do it.
And
but the people in there now, they keep getting that $ between them and what they know is right.
Right, and then you think about, well, people used to get irritated. Well, Gene Roddenberry had all these lawyers, and it was kind of irritating. I'm like, well, I can see why he had them.
Yeah,
I can totally see why he had them. Obviously, if he had a vision that was this well written and well scoped out and could be variated in so many ways, but really had to be followed, you want to protect that from people who would just want to make money.
Yeah.
So, isn't it weird we're talking about Section 31, but it goes back to that Gene Roddenberry conversation again?
Well, yeah, I mean, because, unfortunately, he didn't really leave the reins of responsibility to make sure his vision was kept intact after, before he passed away. I figured his son would, but apparently his son's really not interested in keeping the show the way his father wanted it. He's kind of just sitting back and taking the money in as it's coming in. So it's unfortunate that's going on, But it would have been nice to, if he'd have found somebody that really believed in his vision of the show, said, look, you're going to inherit this. This is going to be your thing to make sure that this stays the way I want it, and it's yours. And so it would have been nice if he'd have done that. But unfortunately, here we are.
So if you got another point that you wanted to bring up about Section 31 and its influence on Star Trek.
Nope. That's it.
I know it may seem like a bit of a complaint fest, but I wish I could get on here and be civil about it and say, if you feel you have the, if you like Section 31 or whatever, and you have, and that's your favorite aspect of Star Trek, then you have every right to do so. But, recently I read a little article about civility applying in a broader context. And basically it started out by saying that the value of civility is one of the few things all Americans can agree on, right? That's a common assumption. Yet it's an assumption that depends on everyone thinking they're a full member of a community. But what about if they're not? Now that has cultural connotations about what's happening now, but
yeah,
in general, let's take that and put that into Star Trek fans for a minute. If Star Trek fans are insisting on civility among people, but they want to insist that, well, there's only civility among Star Trek fans who accept Star Trek, period. Discovery, whatever it is. It's all Star Trek. Other than that, there can be no civility if you're fighting it.
Yeah.
That creates that condition that we don't fit into that framework of civility.
Yeah.
So chances are, I just see if you're a person out there who's advocating very heavily for Section 31, I don't feel you're interested in my civility right now. I feel you're interested in maintaining the status quo, which is going nowhere. So I'm just going to say right now that we need to think less about trying to make Star Trek look more like our personal vision of life and trying to find ways to creatively take our dreams, our yearnings of a better, more humane future, swallow those up, and project those out back into Star Trek. Put in there what Gene Roddenberry put in there and others took out, and take Star Trek out to where no one has gone before again.
Yeah.
That's the way to go. So anyway, here's to episode 42. And from that point on, live long and prosper. All you Star Trek fans, trust and love each other. Live long and prosper. And remember, infinite diversity and infinite combinations.
That's right.
Talk to you next time.